Having to satisfy a whole list of general education requirements can be incredibly frustrating, especially when you consider how expensive a college degree is. So it's a very fair question to ask. Why am I paying thousands of dollars for these classes that aren't even for my major? On this episode of Learning and Leisure, we're going to talk about some of the philosophy behind the gen ed system and how you can leverage them for your own personal growth, whether that is developing new skills that are going to contribute to your major, meeting people outside of your own bubble, or adapting and thinking critically in various contexts. We're going to talk about the mindset that you can use to openly approach these various courses and actually extract a great deal of value from them, and also how you can select these courses based on two axes, ease and interest, so that you don't exhaust yourself and take too much time away from the courses in your kind of core curriculum, but also that you find them interesting, engaging, and hopefully fun. So let's get started. Hi, I'm Alex Mika, and I'm a PhD student studying English literature. As a student and as a teacher, I'm really fascinated in finding the best time management tips and strategies for personal, professional, and educational growth. One thing that I've always been fascinated by is the general education system. And at its core, the general education system is part of a liberal arts education. And this system believes that the purpose of an education is not just to create better workers, but also to create a group of citizens who are well-informed, well-rounded, and can adapt to various contexts. And so you can really divide the skills that it's trying to teach into three kind of major categories. The first one is critical thinking, being able to process information in fields in which you might not be a specialist, but still be able to speak to it and to adapt and to talk across various contexts. The second thing is to communicate effectively. Writing, speaking, arguing effectively is something that is crucial no matter what your career is, because as long as you're dealing with people, you're going to have to persuade them of things. You're going to have to be able to tell them what your ideas are clearly and effectively, or else they're not going to go anywhere. And the final thing is cultural literacy. Cultural literacy is the belief that through history, science, art, ethics, philosophy, we are all part of a greater human story. And by understanding where various people come from various cultural backgrounds, religious, political, and so on, being able to think about those various cultural contexts and how they shape the way we think is incredibly important for those first 2 points of critical thinking and effective communication. So that's the system at its core. Now, this isn't to say that every gen ed system satisfies these requirements and actually produces the kinds of skills or fosters the skills that they purport to develop. But I think it's important to remember these core beliefs and to apply them for yourself. And the way to do that is to create an open mindset. When you're selecting gen eds, think about this philosophy behind them and think about how you might be able to develop those skills in each of these courses. Now, one of the first great benefits of gen eds is that if you are someone who comes into college because, in our day and age, let's be real, a college education is almost expected as a prerequisite for a lot of careers. And so if you're still not sure what that career is or what it is you want to pursue, think about gen eds as a great trial run for a whole bunch of them. It's a buffet at which you can pick at little snippets of each major and think about, does this exhaust me? Does this drain me? Does this excite me? Is this something that I love kind of thinking about and would love to pursue? In those cases, it's a really great trial run before you invest too much time or too many classes into a particular major. This is a great chance to try a little bit of everything. And by the end of it, you might satisfy the requirements really early in your college career. I remember a friend, he knew what he wanted to major in. He knew he wanted to pursue a career in computer science. He had been programming all through high school. He had a job in which he was programming for a company, And he knew that this is his career, like this is his path. But he took a gen ed philosophy course in his first year and he loved it. This guy was an avid reader. He was a really great thinker, and we had some really fascinating conversations through college, and to this day we're still recommending books for one another. But that course opened up a whole new field for him, and he was fascinated by the way that he could think about his own career, his own interest, like what the impact of technology and its use and its creation, the ethics of that for other people. It really informed his career and also just generally made him a better thinker. And so he ended up double majoring because he took so many philosophy classes. He was like, well, I might as well major in this. So he actually took an approach in which he had one major for his career and he had one major just for his own self and his own entertainment. Now, you don't have to go so far as to do two majors. That can be really intense, especially if you don't necessarily have two equally strong passions. But that's why minors exist. That's why concentrations exist. These are ways in which you can kind of on paper say, yeah, I have an investment in this thing. I've taken a number of courses on it. I'm slightly specialized in this particular field. Or even just taking a few classes, maybe not even satisfying that minor requirement, can be still incredibly beneficial. So that's the first kind of great benefit of gen eds, treating them as a trial run for potential career paths or just secondary interests. The next thing though, and I think it's worth admitting, for me, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to be an English major. I was aware of that. But I really like to dabble. I really like to try out different things. And so you might be similarly driven towards a particular major. You know what you want to be, whether that's nursing, engineering, architecture, you're set on your path. And so this might very much feel like another hoop to jump through. And that's completely fair. But I think there's a way to think about these classes insofar as they can help you even for your career or in your own field of interests. So let's take, for example, the most stereotypical class, like gen ed class that was at UConn when I was there, French cinema. I'm sure it's still there because this was a huge lecture of probably a couple, maybe even a few hundred students in a massive lecture hall watching these movies every week. It was an interesting experience, but you might be thinking, how on earth is French cinema going to help me in my career? Well, let's unpack it. Movies are consisted of a lot of different parts. That is dialogue, that is the camera work, that is the music and scoring of the film, that is the actors' performances, the message and the story behind it. All of these things are part of a greater system. So if you are a scientist, a programmer, a psychologist, understanding systems, whether they are data sets or human behavior, there you go. French cinema can help you think about it in a new context. It puts it in a new light and allows you to think about this system in a new way. If you're thinking about cultural literacy, French cinema can teach you a lot about how a certain culture sees itself, how certain directors have tried to share the values, the beliefs, the history, and struggles of one particular nation. Thinking about it in terms of that context, if you are dealing with careers that work with people, whether that is healthcare management or anything that considers how people believe the things they do, diplomacy, politics, that can be a really interesting way to think about in a certain case study how these cultures operate. It's also equally great for thinking about how stories move people. So if you're in marketing, if you're in business, how do we get people to be excited about a product? How do we get them to think a certain way? This can be another really interesting case study of that phenomenon. So think about it from your own perspective. You don't have to leave your major at the door when you go into French cinema and watch this movie with subtitles. This can still be a great way in which you think about those core beliefs that the general education system espouses and apply them depending on what skill you want to develop. So in terms of critical thinking, you can think about how is this film operating on the level of the system, on the level of one aspect of it, the relationship between the music and the actors' emotions, right, and how they play on us. In terms of communication, thinking about how this film projects a certain kind of idea or theme or message, political or social or religious, whatever it might be. And in terms of cultural literacy, how this film is shaped by and also in turn informs a culture. The bottom line is this: when approached from the perspective of what gen eds are supposed to do, in line with what skills you are personally trying to develop, these classes can be really beneficial for you for a especially important purpose. When you apply skills from one set in another context, it strengthens your understanding of them in the original one. And it allows you to test your understanding and apply it to seemingly unfamiliar places. And so, let's say you're trying to develop effective communication skills. This is something that is going to be beneficial no matter what your career, because you're dealing with people, right? A scientist who writes a grant for a new research project is probably going to be addressing a set of specialists whose interests and fields of work may or may not overlap with your own. They might be working in a slightly different field or a slightly different subset of it. And so how do you communicate your ideas in this new context so that they understand why your work is important, why it should be funded, and how it is going to benefit not only the field, but potentially humanity generally? If you're a programmer or someone working in software engineering, how do you persuade the executives to give you the time and the resources that you need to develop this certain program or to fix a certain problem? If they can't understand what the problem is, they're much more likely to say no. But if you can frame it in a way that uses language for a non-specialist audience, you're unstoppable. If you're a nurse who took some ethics courses, you're going to approach patient care in a much more effective way. If you are one who took French cinema and you understand some subset of this kind of new culture, you are more likely to relate to people who might on the surface seem different from you. And you might be able to connect with them on a certain level. And at the end of the day, it does spice up your letterboxd account. So now that we've talked about gen eds as professional cross-training and a way in which you can become adaptable in various contexts, let's actually get into the practical steps of selecting the right gen ed courses for you, the optimal system. I like to think of my selection of gen eds along two axes: ease and interest. The courses should ideally be both interesting and easy, because you don't want to just have to sign up for a really expensive nap time, but you also don't want it to tank your GPA, because at the end of the day, your major courses mostly do and should come first. So I like to think about it in kind of 4 quadrants along a grid. The easy and interesting courses are my recharge zone. That was the history class. It was a fascinating time. I really enjoyed it. Sometimes it was a little bit difficult, but overall it wasn't too bad. It was really interesting, and the requirements were relatively minor. And so that was a great class, like the 10 out of 10 gen ed class for me. French cinema was also along those lines. It was very easy, but I really got a lot out of it in a number of different ways. The next category is interesting but hard. These courses demand sometimes quite a bit of time, but you still find them fascinating. For me, that was African American theater. The professor established at the beginning of the semester that this course was going to take 9 hours of work outside of class time, because of the university kind of belief that for every credit hour, you should be spending 3 hours outside of class. And she stuck to that. I think she probably had like a stopwatch and ran through the things on her own to test it. And yeah, she put us to the test. But it was a really fascinating class, and I really got a lot out of it. So that is what I would call the growth zone. It was something that I wasn't particularly experienced in before, had very little kind of base knowledge, but I was really interested in it. And as hard as it was, I still found it really stimulating. I found it fascinating. I found it helpful. So that was the growth zone. The next quadrant is easy but boring. There's a number of classes out there that are going to be like that for you. It might not be a subject that you're particularly interested in, and that's okay, right? Not all of them are. And so if it's a subject that you're kind of dreading or not particularly good at, or it's not what gets you out of bed in the morning, but it's easy, that is what I call kind of like a buffer zone. It just gets you along. It's not going to tank your GPA if you, because it's relatively easy, but it's not going to be the most exciting experience either. Such classes, I would say, if, for example, you're not really interested in lab courses, right? You have to take a science requirement. You're not interested in a lab course, but you do kind of like thinking about the bigger, more abstract questions. Maybe see if you can find a course that is more analytical or discussion based, but still satisfies that science requirement. So in that kind of case, it might still not be the most interesting, but at the very least, it plays on a set of skills that you have to the extent that it can. The last category is the avoid zone. These are courses that are hard and boring for you. I remember I signed up for a public policy course, which is actually a subject that I'm really interested in. But I imagined the course to be something different than what ended up being on the syllabus. And through no fault of the professor or the course designers or whatever, it just was not my thing. I ended up dropping that class and I took a different gen ed instead. And that's another thing to remember. If you come into the class and you're feeling this might not be the right vibe, get out of there, right? There's still going to be plenty of courses. As long as you're still in a period in which you can select new ones and there's space in them, trust your instincts. If you feel like this class is going to be hard, or this class might have a negative effect on your GPA, listen to that instinct. Get the heck out of there. So that was the avoid zone for me. Hard and boring, woof. It's not going to be a good time for you. Another practical consideration to make is when you are going to take the gen eds and how many you might take in a particular semester. For me, I really thought about how heavy my workload would be in each semester, prioritizing my major courses. So if I knew I was going to be taking a lot of reading heavy classes for my major, I didn't want the gen eds to take away that reading time. So I would choose perhaps ones that were more on that easy side of the spectrum as opposed to the hard ones. So sometimes I might, compromise and take an easy but boring course because it was available, because I knew this semester it's really going to be crunch time for some of those classes and I need to focus on those. In semesters in which you might not have that much going on, or you haven't been able to get into the courses that you were really hoping for, this might be another opportunity to take some of those gen eds. And they can be, like I talk about that spinach and candy analogy, some of those courses really can be candy for you, right? If you're thinking, man, I know if I take 4 classes in my major this semester, I'm going to totally burn out. Maybe that could be another semester where you satisfy a few more of the gen ed requirements than you might normally do so. If you knew last semester that the balance was kind of off and you might need a few more kind of distractions, this is a great time to take a couple more gen eds and think about other things than just what you're focusing on. If there's, let's say, one course that you really need to lock in on, take some of those easier courses. That might still be, hopefully, along that interesting, boring axis, still interesting and engaging, but not necessarily as taxing in terms of workload or commitment. And finally, once you've selected a list of courses, kind of like a short list of them that you think would be interesting and engaging and, or at the very least, easy, now comes the time for some research. For me, I started by asking upperclassmen, people further along in the program, who had perhaps taken those courses before. What was their experience like? And I really focused on how passionate was the professor. That to me was the most important thing, because a lot of times, even if it's not a subject that I'm interested in, I don't know what it is, but when I hear people who love what they do talk about the thing, I'm right there with them, right? If you're going to be talking about pearl diving, I don't have any special connection to pearl diving, but if you're really interested in it and you're telling me all these things about oysters and whatnot, I'm there. I might as well jump on off the boat with you tomorrow, like metaphorically speaking, because I'm not going to do that. But I am totally in. And so when people talk about professors who have that kind of interest, I might be more willing to take a more difficult course just because to me it's worth it. It's worth hearing those people talk. The next thing is, if you don't have those people further along or your peers who have taken the course before, a really great resource could be Rate My Professor. Take it with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of disgruntled students out there who might have not done as well as they hoped and decided that they're going to retaliate in one of the few ways that they can. So, of course, it's an imperfect kind of resource, but also see those comments. See what the grade was that the student anticipated to get or did get, and also the level of difficulty that they mark on there. But really focus on those comments. Are they saying that this professor is fair? Are they saying that this is someone who is responsive? Are they saying that this is someone who is engaging in lectures and open-minded during discussions? These are really important things to look out for to make that experience as valuable for you as possible. So use the resources at your disposal. Once you have that list, really think about and ask around or do some research on them. Think about what they do, how they talk about the things they do. You can even reach out to the faculty and say, hey, I'm really interested in taking your class next semester. Would you be willing to share a syllabus of it? Not necessarily, if you don't have the one available for next semester, if you're going to change things, do you have past syllabi so I can take a look at what's the workload? What are the texts that we're going to be reading or engaging with? What is the textbook like? How is the course structured? Is there a really big project that counts for 95% of the grade and the other 5% is attendance, right? Like, what's going on here? Any kind of data that you can pull to create a more informed decision and know exactly what it is you're getting into is going to maximize your potential in that course and also outside of it, thinking back to those Gen Ed core philosophy principles, right? And the development of the skills that you're really trying to improve in. And so that's kind of my philosophy behind Gen Eds. I know it's an imperfect system, but I truly believe in its core beliefs. They have really helped me in my own interests, in developing new skills, new passions, and it really has opened my eyes to a whole lot of worlds, and I'm truly grateful for the system. Do I wish I didn't have to take some of them? Yeah, 100%. And maybe I'll talk about them at some point. But at the bottom line, it really can be a great experience if you are willing to go into it with an open mind and a clear set of goals of what you hope to accomplish by the end of the semester for that course. And really, that's, I think, applicable to any class you take and any experience you go into. What you expect from it and how open you are to the experience is going to largely determine what you actually get out of it. If you think that this is just a hoop to jump through, that's probably what it's going to be. But if you're willing to think about how this works, why it exists, and why you're going through this process, you are much more likely to get so much more out of that experience. So, good luck with selecting your Gen Eds. I really hope that this process is helpful for you, especially that ease and interest grid. And if you have suggestions on how you selected Gen Eds in the past, leave a comment below. Or if you have any other questions, I'm happy to talk about them. Feel free to reach out in DMs on Instagram or TikTok and check out some of the other content that I've been putting out here in these discussions. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you all next week.